The doctor went on at length about his standing in the field of hypnosis, quote, "I am probably the leading expert in the world," and abilities, quote, "I can hypnotize everybody in this office in less than 5 minutes." Detailed his successes with Henry Bush and Albert DeSalvo, and ventured opinions on various aspects of hypnosis. But when Langman, who had been researching the possibility of assassination through mind control, asked, quote, "Do you feel that Sirhan could have been self-hypnotized?" his expansiveness vanished. "I'm not going to comment on that case," Bryan said curtly, "because I didn't hypnotize him." When Langman explained that she simply wanted his opinion, Bryan exploded. "You were going around trying to find some more ammunition to put out that same old crap," he said, "that people can be hypnotized into doing all these weird things." He charged out of his office, snapping, "This interview is over."
Another interesting thing is presented in the next section of the Turner and Christian discussion of Bryan, and we'll sum up some of the key points of this afterward. Shaken by the angry outburst, Langman went across the street for coffee, accompanied by a sympathetic secretary. Langman was in for another shock. According to the secretary, Bryan had received an emergency call from Laurel, Maryland, only minutes after George Wallace was shot. The call somehow concerned the shooting. Governor Wallace was shot and badly injured on May 15th, 1972, at Laurel while campaigning for the presidency. His assailant was Arthur Bremer. In the spring of 1977, Bryan was found dead in a Las Vegas motel room from natural causes, unquote, the coroner said. Curiously, the word was issued before the official autopsy. Shortly thereafter, we were put in contact with 2 Beverly Hills call girls who claimed to have known Bryan intimately. They had been servicing him on an average of twice a week for 4 years, they said, and usually were present at the same time. During the last year of his life, he was deeply depressed because his paramour had run off with another man. He became strung out on drugs, and his groin and thighs were pocked with bruises from hypodermic needles. No mention of these marks appeared on the coroner's report. The girls said that to relieve Bryan's depression, they repeatedly titillated his enormous ego by getting him to, quote, "talk about all the famous people you've hypnotized," unquote. As if by rote, Bryan would begin with his role of deprogramming Albert DeSalvo in the Boston Strangler case for F. Lee Bailey, then boast that he had hypnotized Sirhan. The girls didn't sense anything unusual in the Sirhan angle, for Bryan had told them many times that he, quote, "worked with the LAPD on murder cases, and they didn't know that he had absolutely no contact with Sirhan following the assassination." One of the girls thought that Bryan had mentioned James Earl Ray once, but wasn't sure. Remember James Earl Ray. We'll come back to that in a second. But both girls were certain of the name Sirhan. The call girls also linked Bryan to the CIA. At the outset of their relationship with him, he instructed them to call an unlisted phone number at his office. If someone else answered, they were to say they were with the company, unquote, an insider's term for the CIA, and they would be put through to him. According to the girls, Bryan repeatedly confided that he was not only a CIA agent, but involved in, quote, top-secret projects, unquote. However, when he began bragging about such escapades as crawling over rooftops at night in Europe, they were a bit skeptical. "We couldn't see Doc doing that kind of thing. Not all 300 pounds of him we couldn't," one of the girls said, laughing. Upon Bryan's death, his offices were sealed off to newsmen by his estate's probate lawyer, John Miner, who had also helped prosecute Sirhan as a deputy DA. There remains the question of Bryan's claimed hypnotist-subject relationship with Sirhan and what role his connection with the CIA might have played in it. Well, there are a lot of things to pause and ruminate over in this whole passage about William Joseph Bryan. First of all, note all the different people connected with this country's assassinations or attempted assassinations who he basically crosses paths with. We see that he, according to his secretary, received a call from Laurel, Maryland in connection with the Wallace shooting. Interesting in light of the fact that a person we talked about in the Guns of November, a guy named the Reverend Jerry Owen, who appears to have been involved with some kind of escape plan with Sirhan. Certainly he was an associate of Sirhan's and appears to have been in a position to drive a pickup truck and take someone, whether it's Sirhan or a double or somebody, away from the Ambassador Hotel on the evening of the shooting. Now, one of his top religious followers, now recall he also was a Bible-thumping fundamentalist, just like William Joseph Bryan. Basically, one of Jerry Owens' top religious followers was Arthur Bremer's sister. Now recall also that William Joseph Bryan is also a member of the same old Roman Catholic Church as David Ferry from the Kennedy assassination. Also very, very interesting. Worth noting, too, that John Minor, who sealed off William Joseph Bryan's estate, turns out to be a deputy DA who prosecutes Saran. And keep in mind that the instructions given the call girls, that the fact that they were to basically call an unlisted number and say they were with the company if they wanted to get through to William Joseph Bryan Jr. And there's an awful lot to keep in mind here. And remember that Bryan himself said that he apparently worked with the national security establishment. He talked about the fact that during the Korean War, he supposedly helped combat brainwashing. And it's also interesting that the D.D. DeSalvo automatic writing by William Joseph Bryan may refer to Albert DeSalvo, the Boston Strangler, who was, to a certain extent, found out as a result of Bryan's work with hypnosis.
Okay, now, again, back to the subject of James Earl Ray mentioned briefly earlier in the allegation made by one of the call girls who had supposedly been, quote-unquote, servicing William Joseph Bryan. James Earl Ray, well, as those of you also who listen to the Guns of No Member and some of our other broadcasts here know that the case of Martin Luther King is probably the most doubtful of all the assassination cases, of all the major assassination cases. That's saying quite a great deal after you've looked at the single bullet theory in the Kennedy assassination. To say that the Martin Luther King is the weakest of the cases is pretty extreme, but it probably is. There is the least amount of evidence tying an alleged assassin to a murder between James Earl Ray and Martin Luther King of virtually any of the major assassinations.
Now recall, too, that William Joseph Bryan Jr., not only, the call girls said that they were convinced that he had talked about hypnotizing Saran, and they were sure about Arthur Bremer, but they also, they weren't sure, but they said they thought that he had been in contact with James Earl Ray. Now, we're going to take a look at James Earl Ray's involvement with hypnosis, possibly, and keep in mind the L.A. connection also.
Right. Now, the point I'm making is that, now, while James Earl Ray, certainly my way of thinking, and I'm sure most people who have studied the Martin Luther King assassination, James Earl Ray definitely did not fire the shots, could not have fired the shots that killed Martin Luther King. However, James Earl Ray himself, by his own admissions, was involved in the plot in some shape or form, if nothing else as a scapegoat or a decoy. And it's rather complicated to explain, but basically he felt that he had been set up for the assassination rap. We're going to read a little bit more from Walter Bowert's Operation Mind Control. And again, perhaps we're going to entertain the suggestion that there was, again, some type of mind control or hypnotic mental control was used in the James Earl Ray case. Again, Operation Mind Control, Walter Bowert. The contradictory history of Ray's activities in Los Angeles led private investigators to consider, as they had in the Oswald case, that there may have been two James Earl Rays. One, the James Earl Ray who had been in prison, was a painfully shy fellow who seldom opened his mouth and hardly ever raised his voice. Fellow inmates found they had a hard time describing him, since he maintained such a low profile. He had been raised dirt poor, had never graduated from a school of any kind, and there is no record of his ever having expressed a political idea about anyone. In Los Angeles, the other James Earl Ray was described as an outgoing fellow. He enrolled in and graduated from bartending school. He became involved in an altercation with a girl in a bar who objected to his making slurs about the black race. He was very conscientious about his appearance and was an impeccable dresser, who even wore expensive alligator shoes, and he was a right-wing politician who conspicuously campaigned for George Wallace. One other bit of evidence gives unity to the contradictions. Ray had been hypnotized while in Los Angeles. It was not mentioned in Ray's trial, and they put that in quotation marks, and well, that Walter Bowert should, but at the time of his arrest in London, he had in his possession 3 books on hypnotism: Self-Hypnotism, The Technique and Its Use in Daily Living by Leslie M. Lacron, How to Cash In on Your Hidden Memory Power by William D. Hersey, and Psycho-Cybernetics by Dr. Maxwell Maltz. Ray had told William Bradford Huey, quote, "I took a course in hypnosis while in L.A. I had read a lot about it in prison on how it was used in dentistry and medicine," unquote. On December 27, 1967, Ray appeared in the office of Dr. Mark Freeman. a psychologist who practiced in Beverly Hills. Bear in mind, this is about 6 months or less before the assassination of Martin Luther King. On November 27, 1967, Ray appeared in the office of Dr. Mark Freeman, a psychologist who practiced in Beverly Hills. Dr. Freeman remembered that Ray, who'd given his real name, asked to be hypnotized because he wanted to sleep better and remember things better. Quote, "This fellow really wanted to improve his mind," Dr. Freeman said. "He had an awe of learning. He had a bent for reading. He didn't fight hypnosis. He learned something." Dr. Freeman told George McMillan, author of The Making of an Assassin, quote, "You've got to keep in mind that I get a lot of angry people around here. A lot of people who come to me want to teach me how to do it. I get a lot of rough stuff around here. I mean psychotic, that stuff. But I couldn't pick up on any of that with Ray. He made a favorable impression on me. He was a good pupil. I'd show him how to go under, and pretty soon he'd be lying on the couch on his back and start talking. I taught him eye fixation, bodily relaxation, how to open himself to suggestion. I gave him lots of positive feelings of confidence." It may have been that Freeman found Ray so suggestible because he had been hypnotized before. His contact with Freeman and other hypnotists, he told Huey he'd been to as many as 8, may have been prompted by an unconscious urge to undo what had already been done to him. A hypnotically induced split personality, one which was programmed to kill upon command, or merely one which was programmed to run away, following his normal pattern, but this time on command. It's easy to program someone to do under post-hypnotic cue what he normally does, and it's a lot easier to program a patsy than it is to program a hitman.
Couple things. Go ahead. Things now. Keep in mind the William Joseph Bryan Jr. connection, who, according to the prostitutes that serviced him, they said that they thought he had been involved with James Earl Ray. They weren't sure, but it's interesting that they were sure that he was involved with Saran Saran. It's worth noting also that if, as Boward is sort of indicating here, James Earl Ray also was under hypnosis and possibly mind control as well, that he may have functioned in a pattern very similar to Saran Saran. Saran was actually a patsy, even though he confessed, possibly after having been programmed to do so by Dr. Diamond. It's obvious from the physical evidence that he could not have killed Robert Kennedy. Now, it's interesting, too, that James Earl Ray also was involved with mind control. And as Boward indicates here, he may have been a patsy and programmed to confess as well. Another interesting detail is the fact that that book referred to was authored by a man named George McMillan. Now, later, George McMillan married a woman named Priscilla Johnson. Priscilla Johnson had been the first person to interview Lee Harvey Oswald upon his arrival in the Soviet Union. She was listed on a Warren Commission document as a State Department employee. She later was very much involved with Marina Oswald and found a stub of a bus ticket, which was the only physical evidence linking Lee Harvey Oswald to Mexico City. And later on, in a sort of a contemporary note, Priscilla Johnson McMillan was sort of the babysitter, the intelligence babysitter of Svetlana Alilueva, at that time defected daughter of Joseph Stalin. And she also, when Svetlana Alilueva was being held incommunicado, was being sequestered away, she was being held at the home of Priscilla Johnson's parents. So an interesting link up there. Again, note the evidentiary tributaries going between these various assassinations. Possibly here, possibly a link, hypnosis link between Saran and James Earl Ray. But this is a pattern that we've looked at before. There are a lot of interesting connections between the social milieu surrounding these supposedly lone nuts.
Indeed, and I think that that's the main lesson that we learn from doing this research and doing these broadcasts is that, again, coincidence certainly does exist in the world, and circumstantial evidence in and of itself is not a valid proof in most situations. However, time and time again, we run into conspiracy coincidence, piled on top of conspiracy coincidence to the point almost of the absurd. And again, at a certain point, one has to draw the line and say, well, I'm beginning to doubt that this is all coincidence, and this is indeed more and more what we begin to find in the case of mind control. There are just too many things cropping up in too many similar places to entirely discount them as being simply chance. Anyway, What this is going to be is not chance. This is going to be on purpose. We're going to take a short break for a few minutes, and we're going to be back to continue on with the information section. When we do finish the information section, we will be having open phones later tonight. But next, we will be continuing with more information. So don't go away. This is Nip Tuck. I'll be back with Dave Emery in just a few moments as we continue with Radio Free America right here on KFJC. You guessed it, Los Altos Hills. Don't go away now.
Illuminati is on the grass.
This is Nip Tuck, and I'm here in the studio with Dave Emery, and we're going to